Hello, and welcome to Women's History Month 2025, day 15 on March 15th. You just heard the third movement entitled Beatitudes from a set of four pieces called Piano Poems by Chicago composer Regina Harris Baiocchi. We're going to speak with her in just a sec, but before we do that, I wanted to tell you that tomorrow, March 16th, you have a chance to hear this and many other works live and in person for free at the Harold Washington Library in downtown Chicago at 3 p.m. I will be giving a selection, a sampler platter, if you will, of pieces that I've played or will be playing during March 2025 at the concert tomorrow. I also want to say, I think I might sponsor an Earl sighting or something like that because that is my cat. And I will tell you that I left him in the take for this video because he kind of adds to the mood of this piece, which is actually connected to a poem. Regina is also a poet, in addition to being a fabulous composer. And there is a poem that goes along with this piece. But if you want to hear the poem, you're going to have to come to the Harold Washington Library tomorrow at 3 p.m. The only clue is that Earl, waiting by the door, kind of reflects or is in dialogue with the sentiment of the poem and the music. So, without further ado, here is composer Regina Harris Baiocchi.
Beatitudes is based on a poem that I wrote during the COVID-19 shutdown. Beatitudes, obviously a spinoff from the Beatitudes in the New Testament of the Christian Bible. Um, I talk about how, you know, uh, fortunate people are, even the misfortunate ones. And so, um, I don't know. It Making the transition from poetry to music is not always something that can be articulated in words. I think when people hear the poem being read and then they hear the music being played, their interpretation or their travel or their leap from poetry to music is just as valid as anything as I could say about how I got from Beatitudes, the poem, to Beatitudes, the music. I am a composer, a poet. I also write fiction and nonfiction. Um, and I mention it because those disciplines are often intertwined. And when I talk about piano poems, I'll tell you how they sometimes intertwine. Um, I've been in music since I was 4 years old. Started working in a group called the Girls Choir. There were hundreds of girls in that choir. Years later, I met up with some of the other people, and we were talking. They said, "Oh, it's in the Girls Choir." So that had a profound impact on my life. I still think about that experience and things that I learned there at age 4. Um, I, live and work in Chicago, um, and that has had an impact on my life as well. A lot of rich and wonderful things here. And, Chicago is probably a good representative sample of the country. All the good things in the country are here. All the good things in the bad things in the world also exist here. And so I grew up in Bronzeville in Chicago. I went to one of the oldest Black Catholic schools the oldest Black Catholic school in Chicago. And so I had an education that was steeped in African American history, and I presumed that everybody else was learning the same thing. And then when I went to high school, it was a bit of a culture shock. Um, and as I navigated the world, I realized that people's experiences are different, and so that made me even more curious about things that I didn't know and how people learn, how they synthesize information, and how that information impacts my art and what I do. I think that sometimes people make a conscious effort to write Black music, write jazz or gospel or blues, and other times, I can write a symphonic piece that I think people will hear and say, "Oh, that sounds like a Black composer," which is interesting because I was listening to some music this morning that sounded like a Black composer and the person wasn't Black at all. So You can just everything I just say, you toss it out the window if you don't agree with it. But it's interesting how those things subtly influence my expressions, how I say things, how I write things, how I hear things. Because even when I got your questions about piano poems, I realized that how I write or how I hear things may not line up with the canon, may not line up with the way other people hear things, and you know, neither is right or wrong, just different. I hear music when I'm reading poetry, and I see poetry sometimes when people are talking. It's actually quite annoying. When I'm talking to people
You get annoyed
because
by the poetry you hear in your mind?
yeah, it's like there's a radio constantly going on in my head, and sometimes it's playing music, and sometimes it's playing poetry, and sometimes it's doing whatever. Like I was texting someone, and her text, it just slapped me in the face that it was a haiku. So then when I texted it back to her as a haiku, she was like, "That's nice. Is that how it sounds?"